Okay, guys. Episode 12, Patzer's Playground. Let's get it going. Okay. So black is not being too aggressive in the opening. White can't really say the same thing for white. He's being quite aggressive. Alright. Chess Kid is from Canada? No. He's from California. Okay, so black is playing a sort of hippopotamus setup. So this opening with a6, b6, d6, e6, g6, h6 is known as the hippopotamus. Kind of super solid, but not exactly the most testing opening. So white develops, which is good. 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 Okay. So black has successfully fianchettoed both of his bishops. He's just advancing his pawns one square forward. Okay. White has developed his pieces quite sensibly. Knights on natural squares. He has a nice pawn center. The question is, what should white do? What should white do? Any suggestions? There's a reason I included this game. It's because I know that you guys face this type of opening a lot. And you're wondering, well, it looks super solid. How can I break through the wall? Well, that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. So, a lot of moves make sense, right? So you can play a move like queen to e2, you can play a move like queen to e1, you can play a move like rook to e1, you can play a move like bishop to e3. But, what's white's big advantage in this position? Space. Yeah. I'd agree that white also has a safer king, but his big advantage is space. Is space something that's a permanent imbalance, or is space a temporary imbalance? Slightly in development, yeah. But black also has 3 pieces developed, just not as aggressively posted. Yeah. So it's semi-temporary. It's true. It's true. Because your opponent can kind of strike back and grab space if he wants as well. So you want to take advantage of your space as quickly as possible before your opponent can neutralize it. So notice that, given a few moves, if black can, get like a move like f5 in or something, it's going to be kind of hard for white to break through. So the correct move here is indeed to play f5 immediately. Okay. So this requires a little bit of calculation because how many attackers are on this pawn for black? Well, there's 3. 1, 2, 3. And we only have 2 defenders. Oops, not that way, but this way. Okay, so the question is, why does this move work? Well, okay. So say black takes. Okay. Now, notice that if black wants to actually win a pawn here, he's going to have to compromise his pawn structure, right? So if he plays, for example, knight takes pawn, notice that we have a very strong idea of bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and now we can actually give a check on e1.
Check.
It's not so clear how black should respond, because there's really no way to block effectively. And if you can't block, then this king will lose its right to castle. So if king f8, for example, now, I mean, there's several things white can do. One might be to play a move like knight to g5, try to play like queen h5, queen takes f7. But in any case, black's going to have a lot of trouble getting his pieces out. So it's probably unwise for black to actually accept the pawn sacrifice. So okay, let's say black is more prudent and decides to castle here. Well, now we have a strong move here, which is bishop g5. So what does that threaten? What does this move threaten? So yeah, it threatens a pawn fork with f6. So black would pretty much be obliged to respond with f6. And now, when you see a good move, look for a better one. So our first instinct might be, well, we should remove our bishop from capture. But what we should actually do instead is capture on g6. Because if black captures our bishop, well, he's gonna be mated. We take on h7, king h8 forced, knight takes g5, and all of a sudden this knight f7 is difficult to stop. Not to mention we're actually up, I mean, we have 3 pawns for the piece. So this is probably not gonna work for black. So immediate strike would be the best response here, but you know, it's not mandatory. So rook e1, okay, not the worst, not the worst. But notice that in some lines we actually prefer that our rook is on f1 because this f file is going to get opened. So notice that this move actually might be a waste of a tempo in a way, because our rook might prefer to be on f1. But again, it's not the worst. Okay, so knight d7. So again, in this position, f5 is still quite good because of this pin. So now black can't even win a pawn if he wants to. And so now the idea after f5 is we want to weaken this pawn so we can play knight g5. And it's actually impossible for black to defend this pawn. So say black, you know, does nothing, plays castle or something. So after take knight g5, all of a sudden this pawn is going to fall. Rook f6 or something, just queen g4. And again, this pawn is lost. Okay. So in any case, f5 would be quite strong here. Okay, but now white starts to meander a bit and play bishop c4. So what's wrong with this move, bishop c4? So what's wrong with bishop c4 here? So you're moving a piece that you already moved, but in all honesty, where is the bishop better? Is it better on this square or is it better on this square? It's actually better on d3. Because notice on d3 it helps promote an f5 advance, whereas on c4 it's kind of just looking at this pawn. So it's actually better on d3. Because again, we want to support our pawn advances. So he's moving it to a square that it's actually worse on, and he's moving a piece twice. So, you know, if he was going to develop, he should probably develop his other bishop or something. But he's actually playing this move with the wrong idea in mind, because after a6, he plays d5, which is, it's admirable that he's looking for a pawn break, but this is actually the wrong one. Because what should black do here? Well, ask yourself first, what's white threat? What is white's threat? Well, white is simply threatening to take on e6. So how should black remove that danger? And the answer is that black should not be afraid of ghosts here. And the ghost that black could potentially be afraid of is opening this e-file, but really it's not a big deal. So simply taking on d5, I'm not sure how he'd take back, say, with a pawn, and simply castling. And here, black is actually fine. Because notice, this pawn is actually hurting white as much as it's helping white. This bishop now is kind of looking dumb. And this open e-file will actually be challenged by black in the very near future. Black will play a move like rook e8, knight f5, and all of a sudden black's pieces are slowly coming to life. Notice that a move in this position like bishop takes c3 would just be very anti-positional, because after pawn takes, notice that black has very weak dark squares. So this is a move that black would never want to play. Okay, but what did black do? Black played e5. So, not the worst choice in the world, but notice that this pawn is actually stronger now in a way, because it's supported by this guy, whereas if by taking, this pawn actually could become a liability. Okay, but black made a sensible choice. He didn't want to open the e-file, so he played e5. Okay, take, 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 take. Bishop g5. Okay, so this makes sense. He's pinning this knight, putting some pressure on the dark squares. Definitely makes sense. So now black doesn't like that fact, so he chases the bishop away. Okay, where should the bishop go? So a couple of choices. We could retreat it this way, we could retreat it this way, or we could move it forward. So which one's best? So it's not a huge difference, but I believe the best one would probably be to play bishop h6. Because now notice that castling is illegal, because you can't castle through check. And it's not entirely clear where this king wants to go. So for example, after say bishop b5, or b5, bishop d3, and then black would probably play this move, king f7. Then after rook f1, you know, black kind of has to castle by hand, play a move like rook e8 and king g8. And white should be a bit better. And black's position is actually fairly comfortable, but I mean, this bishop's kind of out of play on b7. And this knight on e7 doesn't have much of a future. White's pawns are doing a good job of kind of locking up black's pieces. So a bit better. Yeah, but notice that if g5, for example, in this position, notice that we have queen h5 check.
Check.
And this is already getting disastrous. Because after king d7, now we can play queen h3 check, king e8, now bishop e2, and bishop h5 is going to be super nasty. So this is not something that black would want to go into. And notice that if knight g8 ever, we can always play bishop g7 and trap the rook. Okay. So in any case, bishop h6 is probably preferable, but the move that white played isn't the worst. Okay. So now black plays this move g5. A little bit weakening of the king. He probably should have just castled. He would have been fine. Okay, so white retreats to g3. Notice that this check actually doesn't do a whole lot. So if you check first, simply knight g6. And it actually helps black move his knight to where it wants to go. So always be careful about giving an unnecessary check. Because now after the bishop moves and castling, again, black is fine. And now this knight can use this square, or potentially this square. But okay, so in this position, white plays bishop g3. Not much of a difference between f3 or g3 and f2. He wants to get rid of this bishop, which makes sense. And he's not worried about double pawns, really. Both moves are about the same. So take, take, and h5. Okay. So now this is an important point, because this is actually a very interesting position. somehow. Out of this kind of offbeat, non-standard opening, we actually get a very interesting position. Okay, so now this is a very positional kind of setup here, because there's not much tactics going on, because not much is hanging, not much is being threatened. So in these types of positions, you need to ask yourself, where do you want your pieces to be? So let's start by asking, where does black want his pieces? So for example, where does black want this guy? Right. So black wants this guy on this square. And how does he get it there? How does he get it there? Well, pretty simply. Just g6 and e5. Okay, so first thing to notice in this position is that this square is great for a black knight, because notice no white pawn can attack it. And furthermore, it's actually on a dark square, so this bishop is going to be immune. Like, there's no way this bishop can ever take this knight on e5. So this knight would be a monster on e5. Okay. Now, what about this guy? What about this guy? Where does he want to be? This one's a little bit trickier, but you got to be greedy as possible. You want the absolute ultimate square for this guy. And so, to be greedy as possible, you should say that this knight wants to be here. So notice that yes, it's on a light square, so yes, black could trade this bishop off for it, but it would give white a monster pawn on e6. That would certainly be a thorn in black's side, no matter which way black castle. And so what's one potential route to get it to e6? There are a few, but what's a simple one? Yeah, so the simplest one would be this way, and this way. Okay. So in any case, black played this move h5. Okay, so we kind of know where black wants to put his knight. We know where white wants to put his knight. Now let's ask ourselves, what is the main target for white? Like, what should white be trying to target? What square or what pawn or what piece is black's weak point? Right, so the weakest point in black's position is probably this guy. e6 is of course weak, but we already established we want a knight there. But this f6 pawn is difficult to defend because it's on an open file and it's backwards, right? If you ever push it, we can simply take it. Okay, so with all this being said, we kind of, broke down the position. What should white play here? What should white play here? e5 is what he played. It's probably not what he should play, though. Okay, so this is a really important point now. This is a really important point. So there's a fine balance between enacting your own plan, and stopping your opponents. And it's very difficult to know which to do when. So this idea, of knight g6, e5 seems kind of impossible to stop, right? But notice a move like, say, queen d4 just helps black do what he wants to do, right? Because knight g6, knight e5 anyway. Notice that this queen defends f6. So by the same token, rook f1 just helps black what he wants to do anyway. Knight g6, knight e5. Again, this is defended. So So we're not going to be able to stop the plan, but we can maybe make it a little less attractive. So, I mean, there are a lot of things you can do here, but I think the best choice would be to play a move like bishop e2. So the idea with bishop e2 is that we're threatening to take on h5, and black doesn't want to allow white to play bishop h5 check. So for example, if h4, we can play bishop h5 check, and this is actually really annoying for black. Because if king d7, just queen g4 is like almost mate. So he'd have to play king f8, and then it's kind of embarrassing that king is not really where it wants to be. So, right, black would have to play g4. And now, notice that black had to make a bit of a concession, right? Like, he would have preferred to have these pawns on g5 and h5. But now, with this pawn on g4, there's actually an alternate route now, right? So now we can get to e6 via e2 f4 e6, whoops, or e2 d4 e6. So now maybe we, put our queen on d4, our rook on f1, play bishop d3, knight e2, knight f4. There's a variety of things we can do, but at least we kind of force black to make a concession before continuing with our plan. Okay, but the move that white chose in the game was actually really interesting. And it's actually not a bad move. And it's this move e5. Okay, so it looks very strange at first, but the idea behind it is actually very concrete and very good. So what's the point behind this move? Well, the point is that actually now this square will never be used by black's knight. So notice that he's forcing black to put a pawn on the square that his knight wants to occupy, right? So no matter which way black takes, probably fe5. But either way, now notice this knight is never coming to e5. And where is this guy going? Well, now the e4 square is opened up. So in one move, we've taken away black's best square and opened up a good square for ourselves, all at the cost of a mere pawn. Now, to be fair, after a move like knight f5, g4, hg4, queen g4, and bishop c8, it's unclear if white has enough compensation for the pawn, but I mean, this king is still stuck in the center for quite a while. And so this move actually has a lot of benefit to it. And white's position is more comfortable even though he's down a pawn. Like the extra pawn is this pawn, which is firmly blockaded, so white actually has some compensation here. But thankfully for our hero, this move actually paid immediate dividends because black was flummoxed and replied f5. Well, that certainly wasn't the best move. Okay, so white has to be in good shape now. Question is, what's the most accurate way to continue? What is the most accurate way to continue? So, everyone is not heeding the advice. The threat is stronger than the execution. The threat is stronger than the execution. So we actually don't want to move this pawn at all. Because we always want to have this idea looming, if possible. Because what does it do? Well, it opens up the e-file. And we always want to have this idea looming, if possible, because what does it do? Well, it gives us a passed pawn in the 6th rank. But there's no rush. There's no rush. So, what should white play here? So we want to play a move where we can develop with the gain of time. And there's only one move that actually does that. And the move that does that is actually queen to d2. Very, very quiet move, but we're simply threatening to take here. And it's not entirely clear how black defends that pawn. Not entirely clear. Because again, if he moves this knight, we have pawn takes pawn check. Which is why we don't want to take immediately or play e6. So black probably has to play a move like, say, g4 maybe? Maybe rook g8, sure. But in either case, we're simply going to play bishop d3. And then our threat is to take here and then take here. But notice again how the threat is stronger than the execution. Now all of a sudden these pawns are all looking ripe for the picking. I mean, what you guys suggested isn't bad, but you want to be accurate and give black as least of a defensive possibility as you can. And by kind of clarifying the situation with this capture, you kind of let black figure out what your intentions are. But if he's not sure if you're going to go here or here, it's, you know, twice as hard for him to defend. Right, so if he takes on e5, then, I mean, he's losing at least a piece, right? Because now this guy's going to fall. There's a pin, so he's going to triple up on the file, and there's no way he can save this. I mean, eventually you're going to take on f5, play bishop e6. I mean, this is just hopeless. So he can never take on e5 is the point. Because that knight's a dead duck. Okay. Yeah, if he takes on e5, same thing. The knight's still a dead duck. So queen d2, take... Okay, well, I mean, I can take on e5 first, and I'm still threatening to take here. And again, this guy's a dead duck. Rook e1's coming. So, what did white play? Well, white played what you guys thought he should play, e6. But notice that you're not actually threatening a single thing with this move. But a pawn on the 6th is a pawn on the 6th. And white's still doing well. Black should have never allowed this pawn to get this far. So for example, after knight g6, queen d4 now, queen e7, rook f1 to target this pawn, h4, rook f5, knight e5. White's up a pawn, and this king is still not feeling too happy. White might even consider exchange sacrificing just to get a knight in. Hopping all over the place. But okay. So black played b5 here. So white retreated his bishop. Oh, sorry, white played queen d4 first. Okay, attacking the rook, sorry. And then after knight g6. Okay. So knight g6 was not the best move. So white to move and win. Do you guys see it? Yeah, very good. So queen g7 is the move, which our Patzer spotted. So the point is we're threatening queen takes knight. There's actually not a single thing that can be done about it. Not a single thing that can be done about it. So if pawn takes bishop, queen takes knight, check. And no matter where the king goes, it's mate on f7. So queen g7 was best, queen e7, and now all the pieces fall.
Check.
Take, bishop d3 now, so now just up a piece, and has an attack. c6. Take, take, take. King c7. Okay, let me go back to what you guys are saying. So, yeah, I mean, if bishop d3 here, well, then black can defend with rook g8. And sure, you can take on f5, but you're not winning by force here. I can play queen e7 here. If you take and queen h8, I have queen f8. And again, I'm surviving. Barely, but I'm surviving. And as you know, after queen g7 take, you always want to take a piece first before you play mate. Of course, it's mate in one, but you always want to rub it in whenever possible.
Check.
And take pieces before mate. So that's why you don't do that. But okay. So queen e7, you win a piece. Okay. This is all pretty standard. Okay, bishop e4. Okay, rook g8. Queen f5, all good.
Check.
Okay, all good. There's only one more thing I want to show you guys, which is this one.
Check. Check.
Okay, so this is all real good. Okay, so what should white play here? What should white play here? Right. Well, now white has to follow the rule check plus mate equals checkmate. So white should probably play this move.
Checkmate.
And as the nice lady says, check plus mate equals checkmate. Of course, white didn't play that.
Check.
And played this and made his task a lot more complicated because after this and this and this and this, all of a sudden, it's not like super crystal clear. I mean, he's still completely winning, but it's not like utterly hopeless yet. But now it's going to get hopeless because, well, bishops move backwards, but black forgot. Did white? Well, probably not. Nope. So white wins. Alright. Well, other than missing mate in one, not the worst, but e5 was actually a very enterprising move. I don't know if it was the best, but the positional moxie behind it was well-founded, so yeah. Interesting game. But notice how white didn't take full advantage of that hedgehog setup, or sorry, the hippopotamus setup that black played. Is this an ace-rook game? No. Ace-rook is not going to be on Patzer's playground. Ace-rook is above a Patzer. Okay, so let's look at one more game from one of the heroes of chat. Alright. So our hero is black in this game. So we're going to see a Real Lopez. Or as you guys like to call it, a Ruy Lopez. Okay, so knight f6. This is called the Berlin. Made famous by Vladimir Kramnik against his arch rival Garry Kasparov in their 2000 World Championship match. He essayed the Berlin successfully to draw every game as black. Drawing black every game is pretty good against Kasparov. Scherblingzer. It'll be on YouTube if you want to check it out later. So don't feel too bad about sleeping. But yeah, okay. So we got a Berlin. Black trying to play Kramnik-like. Okay. So now there's actually a bunch of moves here. So we can play knight takes e4, which is known as the open Berlin. We can play d6, which is known as the closed Berlin. We can play bishop c5, which is the Beverweek Berlin. So there are a few Berlins. Obviously this pawn is not free, but black chooses the infamous lose a pawn Berlin. It's a name I just made up now, but since no one's ever played before, I'll call it the lose a pawn Berlin, because here white just wins a pawn for nothing. So there's a reason you don't play a6. It's because you don't want to just lose a pawn. So yeah, a6 just loses a pawn. So you don't want to play the lose a pawn Berlin, because, well, you lose a pawn. So after take, he's just down a pawn. Hey! Speak of the devil. Speak of the devil. Say his name 3 times fast and you play the loser pawn Berlin. Yeah, so basically white's just +1 here. Well, I showed you. You can play any one of 3 moves. So like I said, in this position you can play this move, you can play this move, or you can play this move. But not this move. So yeah, you don't want to play the lose a pawn Berlin. If you guys want to learn this opening in more detail, call up Vladimir Kramnik, he'll be glad to help. But okay. So the problem is, after queen d4, in this position, for example, well, you're not actually threatening anything, right? Just knight f3. You can't take this, obviously, because you lose everything. So queen d4 doesn't actually accomplish anything, because white's castled, black's not even close to being castled. Okay, so after knight e5, I mean, black plays the best moves up after this point, but notice, how many center pawns does white have? And how many center pawns does black have? Yeah, so that's never good. Never good. Last I checked, 2 is better than 0. So the problem is, like, he's down a pawn, but he has, like, negative compensation. Oh, I mean, he has 2 bishops. Okay, I guess that's something. But the problem is, the way the pawns are white's pawns are completely fine, and black's pawns are already doubled. So white's going to be able to build a huge center without much resistance from black. Yeah, so I would say there's minus compensation here. Okay, but let's see what happens, because there's still interesting stuff left to happen. Okay, so they're playing good moves here, both sides. So again, black has minus compensation, probably. Okay, rook e8, attack the knight, knight f3, bishop g4, pin. Okay, so his bishops are doing stuff. But again, he doesn't have anything. Okay, bishop e3. Okay, so in general, when you're down material, do you want to trade or do you want to avoid trades? In general. Yeah, so in general, you want to avoid trades. So would you guys say that this applies here? Or would you guys want to make this trade? I wouldn't say avoid at all costs necessarily, but it's a rule to remember. Right, so should white want to, or should black want to make this capture to double the e-pawns, or should he just kind of avoid it? Well, what do you guys think? What do you guys think? So trade not, trade no, trade no. You would avoid it. Yeah, so, I mean, it's not cataclysmic to take, but notice that this actually helps white, if anything, because now he opens the f-file, which helps white. Notice that full control over d4, which helps white. And this pawn structure is actually quite solid. Yeah, so if you have 2 versus 0, you wouldn't do 3 versus 0. So in this position, I mean, everything is not great here, but bishop d6 maybe, you know, looking at some quasi things, I don't know. It's hard for black to really generate any sort of counterplay with these 2 pawns versus nothing in the center, but maybe you can start trying to take control of dark squares with c5, b5, b4, who knows. But, so black didn't take, but he didn't decline the trade either. He played a queen e7. I mean, I can't really fault him for that, but just in general, keeping pieces on the board would have been a little scarier for white. So white plays h3, bishop h5, queen e2, so even white's not rushing to trade. Yes, you can, trap. Yes, you can. Okay, so rook d8, rook e1, all fairly standard. Okay, so bishop e4. So, I mean, black is trying. It's just, it's so hard. Because again, these 2 pawns are such a front that it's hard to generate any threats. Like, I don't even know what black can threaten to threaten. Like, if you give black 3 moves, I don't even know what he could threaten. Like, I mean, c5, c4 maybe to break up these pawns. I'm not sure, really. But white's position is just too solid, and white can slowly make progress. So white plays bishop d2, he's just being super careful. c5, okay, so he's trying to do something. a3, bishop a5. Okay, so here maybe white can play a move like queen e3 just to unpin this knight. And then follow it with e5, get a nice strong pawn in the center. But okay, he plays bishop g5, h6, bishop h4. Okay. So after a bunch of moves where both sides are pretty much just finishing the development and getting their pieces to better squares, what can black do here to try to mix things up a bit? c4. c4 is absolutely correct. Okay, so yeah, what's the point of this move? What's the point of this move? Well, the point is what happens. Okay, well, what happens if white takes? Let's look at that first. This is like the worst thing. What happens if white takes? Yeah, if DC, then we're actually better in this position, believe it or not. Bishop takes c3. And now notice it's very cute. White cannot interpose this move because we can do this. We can do this. So no, that's a cute point. It's a cute point to notice. But so white would have to go here, and now we play g5, and now we take on e4, and all of a sudden black's better because this is not the best. Quadruple isolated pawns, never good. Never good. And we've got our pawn back. So we're just great. Okay, so that's the worst thing. So what happens if d4? Well, if d4, we just take. And I believe we can play g5 again. And then we can take here again. Knight takes or queen takes or whatever. Maybe knight takes. Well, maybe queen. Well, yeah, maybe knight takes. And again, I think we're doing much better than we would be. And if queen e3, then after take, bishop e6, all of a sudden these bishops are starting to be pulling their weight a bit. And okay, I mean, white's still better. White's still better. Oh yeah, well, so yeah, d4, rook takes d4 is possible, but be careful. Be careful because white has this intermediate move g4. And now, all of a sudden, I'm attacking this, and now I'm attacking this. So careful. Rook takes d4 would not be a move to recommend. Right. So yeah, you could take on f3 first, and then take on d4. But then I think I'm still better because I can play knight d5, maybe? And now this is hanging, so I don't think you can do that either. Because if you take the knight, I just take your queen. Although maybe you can take here, but then I take here first. Then you can take the rook. Well, maybe it's okay for you. So, well, in any case, I could take here at least. I could take here at least. And then I think white's better here. Yeah, I think white's better here. But, okay, it's better than what happened in the game. Okay, so anyway, so c4 would have been the best try, obviously. But what did black play? Played rook d4. Okay, so black's trying to be super tricky, obviously, and exploit the fact that this knight is pinned. But what should white play here? Yeah. So white should play g4 here. Then after bishop g6. this rook is dropping, because after knight takes, pawn takes, white has the intermediate move b4. So notice that if white did not have b4, then this knight would be pinned, right? But white has b4, so if you move the bishop, now I can move the knight somewhere, knight a4. And if you take my knight, I take your bishop, and again, I'm up material. And notice e5 is coming as well. And this is nasty. Alright, so g4 would probably have been good for white, but plays rook d1. Okay, so now white is still threatening this g4 idea. So what should black play? So you want to somehow take advantage of the fact that white allowed this rook d4. So the way to do that is to take on c3. And now where should this rook go? Yeah, so now the rook can actually go to a4. And all of a sudden, we're targeting this weak pawn. We have ideas to maybe play c4, get our queen over there. And now black is generating some counterplay. So it's not the worst. We did have to give up our two bishops, but at least we created some weakness in white's camp, and we're going about targeting it. Unfortunately, though, after queen d7, now again, simply take on f6, and g4 wins this rook again. If g4 immediately, maybe a move like knight takes g4 would be strong because the queen is on it. Whoops, the queen is on g4. But, okay, king h1. Okay, now, twice black has been lucky because white has not taken the material offered. So what should black do here? Well, black actually only has one move, but it's actually a good one. So we have to remove this rook from capture. So simply rook to d6. And somehow black's fine here. Somehow black's fine. So we have an idea of simply playing this move, rook to b6. And notice this pawn is hard to defend. And notice a move like e5 doesn't work because this pawn is always pinned to the queen. So e5, we just play rook b6. Yeah. And also notice, yeah, bishop takes f3 would be strong too. But also notice that we have ideas of like taking on c3 and playing knight d5. So say like king h2, for example. Now we can take on c3 and play knight d5. And now notice we're exploiting this pin. So after queen d2, we play back to f6, and now we're threatening knight takes e4. So queen c1, and now we take on f3. And now, okay, at least we gave white some structural weaknesses. And this bishop is kind of silly, actually. So this might be okay. But black played c6, and now again bishop takes f6 and g4, and knight takes d4 wins material. But of course white's just not going to do that ever. Okay, knight d5, good move, good move. So now using some tactics, this pawn is pinned. If this knight takes, then after pawn takes, now suddenly there's a lot of pressure on e4. So this is a good move. This knight might be heading to f4 and h3 potentially. So knight d5 was good. So take with the pawn, g4. Okay. So what should white do here? Or sorry, what should black do here? Well, again, you have to ask yourself, what is white threatening? So what is white threatening? Okay, so white's threatening to take this guy, obviously. Knight takes rook. So we gotta move the rook. But if you thought white was threatening this, you were wrong. Because if pawn takes bishop, queen takes pawn,
Check.
now white only has one legal move. Knight h2. And now queen takes h4. And all of a sudden, we get our piece back. It's not mate, but we win a piece back. And this is fine. So white was not actually threatening this, but he is threatening this. So we have to save our rook. And so rook a4 would have been fine. White tries to make some insane complications with pawn takes pawn. But if white keeps his head about him and simply takes the free material, he should be fine. Which he does. Okay, black again trying to complicate things, but notice that this is still hanging. So after queen takes pawn, bishop g6, and now white to move and win. Right now, white's up a full rook. White's up a full rook. So what's threatened? Well, this knight is threatened, and this queen is threatened. But luckily for white, he can actually save both with this move, knight to f5. And this is just game over. Black can resign here, because now his threats have run dry. If a move like queen c6, just simply f3 should be enough. I mean, you could play king h2 too, and then bishop c7. Whoops, bishop c7, just bishop g3. But okay, so black can resign here. But thankfully for black, he still had a couple of tricks up his sleeve because white played queen g3. And now all of a sudden, black is actually winning, believe it or not. And so why is black winning? Well, we're obviously going to take this guy because it's hanging. So let's take it. Whoops, let's not take it. But let's say we take it. And now, why is black winning this position? He's still down material. But yeah, these bishops are monsters. Not to mention, this king is actually feeling a bit unsafe. And this is very, very good for black. Very good. Black wins the queen. I'm not sure he wins the queen, but... Because don't forget, on queen d5, I play f3. Or queen g2. Oh no, queen g2, I guess you do win the queen. But I play f3. So I don't play king h2. So you don't quite win the queen. But yeah, I mean, this is just very good. Because this pawn on f3 will become a target. Like, I'll play rook e3, queen c6, bishop e4, just pile up on it. And this is really good for black. Okay. So, but unfortunately, black played bishop c7, and now white to move and win. Yeah, and this guy's trapped too. Good point. Okay, but white to move and win here. So the queen's hanging. If you move the queen, I can take the knight. But something cleverer. Same knight f5 still wins. So if take the queen, take the queen, take the knight, take the bishop, take the bishop, rook g4, bishop f2, and rook b7. And this should be winning for white. Up the exchange. And this rook on the 7th is strong. f6 might be an idea in the near future. And if you play, like, take the rook, for example, take the queen, just take back. I'm just up a piece here. Right? Because you were down a full rook, so winning the exchange back is not enough. So knight f5 just kind of saves everything. But once again, white did not play that and play queen c3. Okay. And now white is actually still a bit better, but only one way to be better. It's very interesting. So what must white play here? What must white play here? This is very tricky. Well, the queen is hanging. Right. So rook takes d4 is best, yeah. And then if I play bishop e4?
Check.
What must white play here? Rook takes e4, not as good as, no. Yeah, you have to exchange sack, but how? F3 loses. F3, I take on F3, take on d4. No, not F3. F3 loses. Yeah, rook g2. Rook g2 and white's better. It's tricky, but white's better. Because basically what's going to happen is take, and white's just up a pawn here, right? Have I been streaming all day? I've been streaming for an hour. Okay. So anyway, that's all crazy. Instead, white played queen b3. And now black to move and win. Black to move and win. Yep. We simply need to get on this diagonal for a check. So, queen c6.
Check.
And the point is, we got this, but don't forget, there's actually one more thing we're doing. And we're doing this. So this queen c6 is actually just a fork. So we're forking the king, and we're forking bishop takes c2. So black played queen c6. Good for him. And after f3, played bishop takes c2. And here white resigned. Completely justified. Completely justified. Because this queen has to stay on this pawn. But it can't, right? Can't go here, can't go here, can't go here. And so the only thing that white could possibly try is a move like rook c1. Okay, now how does black win here? I mean, it's fairly simple. Nothing super tricky. Yeah, just take the queen. Yeah, take the queen, take the queen. And now notice we're suddenly up a piece. Rook, bishop, bishop versus rook, bishop. But actually, more importantly, this pawn is queening. I mean, you're up a piece, which doesn't... I mean, that's enough, but... I mean, notice that this pawn is actually worth probably a rook, at least. So, yeah, white was right to resign, and he did. So black turned the tables on him, even though he played the lose a pawn Berlin, which heretofore had never been seen before. So moral story is don't play lose a pawn Berlin, but do complicate things for your opponent when you're in a bad position. Alright guys? So there's Patzer's Playground number 2.